Welcome to The Scoop. This is another Mackinac Center conversation on current event topics. Today, we're talking about the federal COVID stimulus. It has all kinds of acronyms, but we're going to call it the federal COVID stimulus today. Joining me, we've got Mike LaFave and James Homan. They run the fiscal policy shop at the Mackinac Center. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thank you.
All right, so first off, there's been like 4 stimuluses or something over the past year and a half. What exactly has passed over time? And then we'll go into some more details.
Well, there's been 6 pieces of federal legislation that have passed that one group of scholars estimates will cost about $6 trillion in terms of the money the feds have dedicated to keeping the economy moving and addressing the pandemic itself. There are 3 major ones, though, that many people probably remember from the news. There's the original one last March known as the CARES Act. This was a $2.2 trillion effort to underwrite businesses and individuals to keep them afloat while closures were going on. About $300 billion of that was dedicated to individual checks to adults and their dependents. Another $340 billion of that was to state and local governments. And there was another $350 billion or so dedicated to a program called the Paycheck Protection Program, which was designed to keep employees employed by underwriting with loans the activities of businesses that would not necessarily have to pay them back should they meet the requirements of that particular program. Enough time has gone by when the scholars have actually looked at the program, and they said it costs about $337,000 per job saved. So a lot of money dedicated in that first package alone. The second package was worth about $900 billion and was signed into law just last December by President Trump. That included more paycheck protection money as well as checks of $600 to each adult and then their dependents as well as college money, other school assistance. Most recently, what's been in the news in the last few weeks alone is the $1.9 trillion effort known as ARP, or the American Rescue Plan, signed into law by our new president, Joseph Biden. This particular legislation passes down $350 billion in assistance to state and local units of government, and it also included checks to adults equivalent to $1,400 each, plus money for their dependents as well. The state of Michigan is expected to receive about $10 billion of that, and $5.7 billion will accrue to the state government.
Well, just the state and local governments. Michigan residents are going to get a lot more.
Right. So I've heard, we've got million, billion, trillion, I don't know, some senator that said at some point we're talking about real money, and now we're in the trillions. Trillions, is that real money? What does this mean for a regular family? What is this costing? Any input on that, James?
Well, it's really going to depend on how this gets financed. This just makes America riskier because America's doing this exclusively by borrowing money to write these checks to people, write these checks to local governments. And the more you borrow, the riskier things are going to get. So far, we've been able to borrow without a lot of consequences. I know a lot of people are fearing that inflation is going to be around the corner. I'm not as afraid of that one, but this massive amount of debt makes America itself as a going concern a lot riskier.
So how much are we talking? So we've got some that's directly related to COVID. I presume we've got some going to vaccines. The rest is just pure stimulative. We got some for unemployment. What's the kind of breakdown? We don't have to go into specific numbers, but how is Congress looking at this?
Well, it's mostly treating the symptoms. It's treating what people are fearing about COVID, which is the lack of opportunity, the lack of your ability to provide for your family. And so that's why there's so much general programs to keep people employed at their institutions, even if they're not actually working. There's so much money in unemployment insurance for the people that did lose their jobs, and then the direct payments, none of which has much to do with actually fighting against COVID, but rather taking care of people's fears about how the pandemic is going to affect their livelihoods.
Part of the sales job that came down from the federal government was we need to provide states with this money and even local units of government with this money to address budget shortfalls. But nationwide, the net decline in state revenues in the last year or so has amounted to just 0.2%. So the federal government is financing a problem that was solved with the previous bailout packages, including the last one from December. In fact, I believe that the state government of Michigan still has not appropriated about $2.5 billion worth of monies from that tranche of federal spending.
Right. They're getting so much money they don't know how to spend it, which actually is probably good news. I hate to ask this other question. I mean, obviously it's a very close vote. It passed with the minimal number of votes. Very controversial at the federal level. Mike, you're an economist. What do economists say about this?
Well, there's an old saw about economists. If you stretched all of us in the world end to end, we still couldn't reach an agreement. So there's going to be some disagreement amongst economists on whether or not this is beneficial and to what degree. I think that there is going to be a split in that debate. However, I've been delightfully surprised by how many people have said, well, whether we disagree on the ultimate impact of this, we think this package is too big. You'll find that across the spectrum of economists. The package is too big. And that's a theme that James Holman and I have been hitting on or discussing at various stages of the debate over this latest package.
So if you're a regular person, you say, okay, but I got $1,400 and I got $600 last time and I got another 1,000 the time before. It's too big, but at least I'm getting the money. What's the danger of it being too big?
The bill has to be paid. So economists will often say that the public knows that when deficit spending occurs, there's going to be a bill presented to them down the road. Higher taxes, cuts to government services, or less opportunity, or some combination of that. And that's why they often end up just banking that money for a rainy day rather than spending it and actually creating the stimulus that federal officials think will occur.
Yeah, I mean, it was just poor. The fact that we're writing blanket checks to people who don't need extra cash right now just shows how poorly targeted this is. I mean, we've been dealing with this pandemic for a year now. We should have a better understanding of the actual harms that real people are facing from this one, instead of just imagining, oh, we think everyone's taking X amount of dollars worth of harm from this.
Right.
It's like we should be doing better right now. And that's mostly when you look at the state and local government bailout. They expected to have been to have their revenues been hit. It didn't happen. We're bailing them out of a non-existent problem.
Right. So we do have parts of the package that are going to people that are unemployed, that are going to businesses that are shut down. Then we have just the flat money coming to families. But let's bring it to Michigan specific. What's going to the state? What's going to the locals? You just mentioned, so our state budget's essentially flat, even before we're talking about the federal money.
Yeah, we were expecting to take a big hit and it just didn't happen. I mean, part of that is because of stimulus efforts, like unemployment insurance checks are taxable by the state. But a lot of it is just because things were better than what happened. But the state's going to get a big check from the federal government anyway. And then the federal government put some weird strings on it. So like we could use this to emerge out of the pandemic stronger than we were before if we used it to pay down debt. Can't do that, at least as long as it's in the pension system.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're seeing weather from schools. I think the latest I saw was that Detroit and Flint are going to get $30,000-$40,000 extra per student. I mean, what can they spend that on? Local governments are going to get billions of dollars spread across. That's going to be significant depending on the city you're in. What are they talking about doing with it?
Well, I mean, this underscores why it was a problem to just give these local governments and school districts extra money. Like school districts should be open. We should be trying to encourage them to go back to in-person instruction right now. But what's holding that back is not money. It's that we need more widespread vaccines. And until that happens, schools are going to stay closed or partially closed. All the money in the world isn't going to change that fact. And so what school districts are going to do with it, it's going to be up to their school boards, their superintendents, but I don't think that there are easy ways to effectively spend that money to improve education, which is what we should be asking it for. I think it's just going to wind up in someone's pocket.
Yeah, you can only buy so many masks or protection if schools, the ones that are open.
We should have already paid for most of that under previous relief efforts.
There's significant restrictions in the federal bill, on what state and local units of government and schools as well can do with the money. So there is a significant, clear, obvious prohibition on using these revenues to backfill any revenue losses due to a tax cut at the state level. We don't believe that applies at the local level. So at the local level, they could actually use this money for, say, a property tax rebate. I think that's a much better use of the funds than it would be if you, say, created a local economic development program, which is being discussed by some local units, to really use the money. Short of giving it back, I think it's incumbent upon state and local leaders to find the most effective and efficient ways to use this money, and creating new ongoing spending is not among those ideas.
So that's a transition to my next question. So states can't use it directly, indirectly to cut taxes.
Or put it in the pension system.
Locals can't put it in the pension system. So if you're, I saw Port Huron was in the news. They've got a ton of pension debt. They've kind of been slowly paying down, and they've said, if we can't use it to pay off that debt, we're just going to do a property tax rebate. So locals can do a tax cut, which would primarily be property tax. What other options do states do? If you guys are state lawmakers, what are you doing with the money?
Well, I want to use it to protect the state going forward. If there's no immediate need to spend this on services that are going to improve quality of life for Michigan residents, then we should be using it to protect taxpayers in the future. So that's putting money in the rainy day fund, shoring up the unemployment insurance system, and then really finding exactly what those strings are so that we can find compliant ways to protect taxpayers going forward.
For instance, there's I think a $300 million request for spending on roads in the general fund. What if instead of using that money that they wanted to set aside, we're able to free up the money by taking federal dollars, spending it on transportation, and then using the money that was expected to come out of the GF for something like a deposit in the pension system.
But infrastructure is not a bad idea either. We're really getting close to the point where roads are being put together faster than they fall apart. And that could save money in the long term as we go from less expensive rebuilding poor roads to maintaining good and average quality roads.
At the local level, there's also the water and sewer idea. Fees have long funded water and sewer infrastructure at the local level. But here's an opportunity with federal money coming down to spend money on something that could be good for public health, good for the economy, and not as wasteful as some of the ideas we've already heard coming out of local units.
All right. Well, closing it out, let me hear your good and your bad. A little bit of good, a little bit of bad out of the federal COVID stimulus. You can put them all together, whatever you want, all together.
I mean, the good thing is that we have a coronavirus vaccine that got approved in less than a year. I mean, that's the end. The best way to recover from this pandemic is not by writing a bunch of checks, but by making sure that people can protect themselves from the virus. That's the best thing to come out of it.
I agree with that. And of course, even a broken watch is right twice a day. Some of this stimulus money might actually end up in the pockets that where it's most needed and on projects that have a really positive return on investment. So that's the good news. The bad news is, of course, all of this will have to be paid for at some point with higher taxes, cuts to government spending or government programs, and or slower real economic growth. There are no free lunches.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.